Hello again. For those of you who've been feeling a little alienated because you've not been studying your ancestors, well, guess what? This is the first time we're studying my ancestors. After all, these features are not just European, they're Northern European. Take a look at the early MedViz on the student aids page before you read either the description of the Germanic peoples from Tacitus or Beowulf. First of all, highlight the date, 450 to 600 AD, the Anglo-Saxon conquest of Britain. Now, conquest is a little misleading. It wasn't an all-out organized invasion. What it was Germanic tribes moving into Britain. The English are originally from Germany. At times fighting with the people who are already there, yes, but at other times and more frequently, according to the DNA evidence of modern Englishmen, blending in with them. The Germanic peoples moved in and pushed aside the earlier Celtic peoples in Britain. It was part of a whole age of folk migrations, as it's called, caused by three things. First of all, there was a population boom. The climate warmed, more children survived, more people. In the Germanic culture, the oldest son inherited the family home and all of the land. So younger sons had to find another way to support themselves. And there were no jobs in the modern sense in the early Middle Ages. So they turned to pirating and raiding primarily. To go a Viking meant to go raiding, and the Vikings were the last of the Germanic tribal peoples to live this lifestyle. They would set out, usually in groups, with a leader. Tacitus describes how you got to be a leader. And if they encountered people who were strong and could defend themselves, they traded. If not, they raided. In the case of Britain, they actually moved in and settled. So the increased population and that custom of the oldest son inheriting the family estate, called primogeniture, are two of the causes. A third cause was a non-Germanic tribal people, the Huns, coming in from the east. The original homeland seems to have been somewhere in the neighborhood of Mongolia and Manchuria. But by the 400s AD, they were pressing into Europe, and as they did so, they pushed other tribal people in front of them. So there was a huge social upheaval in the vacuum left by the fall of the Roman Empire, at least the Roman Empire in the West. Now, the reading from Tacitus will describe what Germanic society was like back in Roman times, but it was still pretty much the same in the 450 to 600 period that I'm asking you to remember for your end of semester opportunity to excel. And by the way, on that MedViz page, you'll see a map of England about AD 800. It's still not a unified kingdom. Show you how chaotic things were. But Tacitus describes lines about 10 to 30 how leadership was achieved by prestige. The chief didn't have the power to command. People followed him only because they respected him. And in a warrior society, you earn that respect on the battlefield. particularly important lines 30 to 40, where he talks about, first of all, the bond of fealty. The generous chief in handing out the goodies gained by raiding, and the loyalty of his followers who were expected to protect the chief at all costs, including, if necessary, the cost of their own life. And he describes vividly how important that was. He also, on lines 40 and following, talks about how they built what modern armies call unit cohesion. Germanic peoples went into battle side by side with their closest relatives. It was a tribal society anyway, so it's based on kinship. But if I'd been a Germanic warrior in, say, 450 AD, I would have gone into battle with my son alongside me. On the other side of him, my brother. On my other side, if I had a sister, her son would be next to me. And my brother-in-law, his father, next to him. Now, the one thing you cannot do when you fight this way, you can't run away. I mean, I'm going to go home and tell my wife, well, last I saw our son, he was surrounded by the enemy and it didn't look good. I'll take my chances with the enemy, thank you. At least if they kill me, it'll be quick. But he describes how in battles, especially where they were being attacked, the women and children would stand on the hillside and watch. Medieval battles were very small by modern standards. A medieval battlefield might only be the size of a football field. And so the women and children would watch and yell their encouragement. The kids yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, please don't let them kill me, because if we're defeated and our people taken captive, the boys will be killed so they don't grow up to avenge their father's deaths. The women and girls will be taken as slaves, and especially the younger and more attractive women would rip open their dresses and yell, 'Hey, think what's going to happen to all this if you lose. If that won't get you to fight hard, nothing will.'" This is where the Romans got that idea of furor, barbarian furor that we talked about when we talked about the ancient Romans. The Germanic and Celtic tribes went into battle full of emotion. They would pump themselves up by rhythmically beating their swords on their shields to kind of psych themselves up for battle. If you've ever seen a football team before they take the field, they're often doing almost exactly the same thing, beating on each other's shoulder pads and helmets to get themselves jacked up. Tacitus talks about how they made their decisions in the assembly. The chiefs did not have the power to command, but they didn't vote. Everything had to be decided by consensus. Lines about 55 to 65. They did not write down their laws. They had writing, but it was not used for anything as mundane as recording laws or even recording their history. When you look at the PowerPoint on Germanic art, you'll see how they did that in embroidery. The thing to note here is the idea of common law. Basically, the way this worked is tradition, precedence. We're in the assembly and somebody is brought in having accused of been accused of sleeping with Heathabar's wife, and we listen to the witnesses and we decide he did it. So the next phase, what's the punishment? Well, there were no law books to consult. But one of the old men in the assembly would stand up and say, I remember about 15, 20 years ago, Wolfstan was caught sleeping with another man's wife, and this is what we did to him. And the rest of us go, sounds good, let's do it again. English common law is part of the legal system in 49 of the 50 United States. I'll let you figure out which is the one that doesn't recognize English common law. But I'll give you a hint. It's the state that has parishes instead of counties. Germanic religion, like most ancient religions, was polytheistic, multiple gods. And among them are 4 that you have talked about all your life, if English is your native language, but you may not have known it. Tu was the god of the sky, and because events in the sky regulate much of our lives, the rising and setting of the sun, our days, phases of the moon for a long time established a month. In fact, our word month comes from moon. Tu was also associated, therefore, with law and order. Woden was the god of the underworld and magic. Thor was the storm god. He would beat on an anvil in heaven with his hammer, producing the rumbles that we hear as thunder and the sparks that we see as lightning. And Frigg was the mother goddess, associated with home and family and all of that is so very important to many of us. Now, as I'm recording this, it's Monday, named after the moon, by the way. Tomorrow, therefore, is Tuesday. And the day after that is Woden's Day. And the day after that will be Thor's Day. And then we all look forward to Frigg's Day. So as we call them in English, 4 of the days of the week are named after Germanic gods, even though nobody has worshipped these gods for 1,000 years. You may ask, well, what about Saturday? That's named after the Roman god Saturn. Sunday, think real hard and look up in the sky in the daytime. More unique to Germanic religion was the concept of fate. That events are determined, and especially the time and the manner of your death is determined. Now, the Old English word for this is weird, which is sure enough where we get our word weird, meaning strange. But in Old English, weird means something that we cannot know. We don't know when that time's going to be. But the belief was that when your time came, you were going to die no matter what you were doing. Now, I think this is, at least in part, a way of coping with the dangers inherent in a warrior lifestyle. Okay, after all, rule number 1 of war is that people get dead in war. And it's easier to run those risks if you believe that when your time is up, you're going to die no matter what. And until your time is up, nothing's going to happen to you. You can't change it. And people still sometimes talk about things like this. Some idiot raced a train to a railroad crossing and lost. And somehow, though the car was mangled beyond recognition, they walk away with barely a scratch. Must not have been their time. But the most unique aspect of Germanic religion of all is that long German word on the early MedViz page, Götterdämmerung. Can be translated as twilight of the gods or even damnation of the gods. But what the idea was is that the world of gods and men is doomed. In the end, the forces of chaos will overwhelm us, and there is nothing we can do about it but go down bravely fighting. It is in some ways the gloomiest idea I've ever encountered in any of the world's religions. It's very different from Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, for example, which say that in the end, good wins out over evil. Here, we're doomed, and there's nothing we can do about it. But in a way, I do understand it. When I was in junior high, we had, in PE class, we had what they called the slow men's track meet. Basically, it means they didn't let any of the school's athletes participate, just the regular guys. And I was assigned to run the relay, the 880 yard relay. Everything was yards then, not meters. And I got the anchor leg. I was the last guy on my team to run. Well, I don't want to say my teammates were slow, but the other two teams had already finished before I ever got the baton. So there's nowhere that my team can finish but last, right? I ran the fastest leg that anybody running in that race ran, because I knew everybody was going to be watching me because there was nothing else for them to watch. And I wanted to make a statement that, by golly, it's not my fault we're in last place. It's that kind of mindset that this spirit, that this idea created in the Germanic warriors. Now, read Tacitus' description of their Germanic society, but before you read the excerpts from Beowulf, I want you to do two things. First of all, on the videos tab in the module on Germanic society, look at the first video, very short. It's the first lines of Beowulf in Old English. And it will show you just how different English sounded in about 900 AD when this was composed, as compared to what it sounds like today. Old English is taught in universities as a foreign language. You might pick out one or two words of what he's saying, but you won't understand. And back on that early MedViz page, I give you a page from the oldest manuscript that we have of Beowulf, written in Old English. You won't even recognize some of the letters. Everything in human society changes over time. Now, what I'm going to want you to do for the discussion is to talk about where you see these ideas of fealty, of fate, and this gloomy outlook on life. Where do you see those things in the selection I gave you from Beowulf? Hope you enjoy it.